Now, the idea of God that a lot of people follow in the modern day isn't the biblically accurate God. Much rather, some idea of God in their mind, but it's not God in truth and all the majesty that He is. And I think it's because this idea of that God is wrathful has become so taboo to talk about in the modern day, in churches as well. Like, I rarely find any people talk about these sort of things. And it's strange. Yes, we like to focus on the idea that God is forgiving. That's very much true about His character. But it's not mutually exclusive with the fact that God is also wrathful and He can deem judgments on certain people. He can judge people and dish out punishment and crimes. The way He was moving in the Old Testament definitely displays this. And He's not different whatsoever in the New Testament, as differently, or as a lot of people would say otherwise. But those people, I feel, just haven't really dived deep enough into the Bible. So if you're one of those, try and read a little more. And I'll try and explain why God is still a very wrathful God and why we have to really accept this. Well, firstly, let's understand, what does God's wrath ultimately look like? Well, in the future, it's Judgment Day, where we're either sentenced to heaven or hell. In the modern day, it can look like a lot of different things. But one of the primary ways I think God's wrath shows through in the modern day is allowing certain people to stay in their sins. Now, don't get me wrong. The things that God deals on people isn't something that He forces. It's something that people choose at the end of the day. God is very much just that judge that dishes out the punishment, a punishment fitting the crime. He's not the one that forces these punishments onto people. It's just like a criminal that committed a crime. Even if he wasn't aware that it wasn't a crime, like, a murder is still a murder, right? Yes, it might tone down the sentence, but he's still going to be convicted of said crime. In the same way God operates. He judges people based on what they know, their heart posture as well. Since not all judges can understand people, but God knows the hearts of every single human. So in that way, He's able to judge very well and be able to dish out perfectly, justly, the punishment fitting the crime. So you can't just say that, oh, God's forcing hell onto certain people. No, they chose a certain lifestyle and they chose that. So in the end, God has no choice but to sentence them to hell. If God showed blatant favoritism, would that not just be a really, rigged tyrant? Yeah, kinda. And if He forced it on everyone to just, follow His will, that'd be a dictator, no? And so there's a bunch of other things that you could say about whether God is wrathful or not and how it can be bad. But accepting all that He is and that He's simply just in all that He does makes things a lot more simple for you to grasp. In the modern day, where He allows people to just stay in their sin, it's the same thing, right? God can still tell people to get out of their sin, to remind them and try and nudge them away. But He can't force anyone to do something, because that's just what He desires. He desires a relationship, not a slave-master type thing. Well, let me rephrase that, because oftentimes in the Bible it is mentioned slave-master, but the idea of slave and master relationship is one built off love and trust, not the type where it's in like the 1900s and it's, black people being enslaved. God in the modern day seeks a father-son, father-child relationship with us. Because of what Jesus did, we're justified and even further adopted by Christ. So in the end, God will constantly try and bring His children back to Him and listen to Him, as a father does, right? Try and raise his kids right. But most good parents would probably allow their children to go their own path, right? If they force themselves into an extremely destructive lifestyle, what can the Father do? He can do things and force them, but at the end of the day, you're either going to be seen as a tyrant or someone that let their child live a horrible life. So ultimately, like, it's an insane ultimatum. And God, in his wisdom, decided that it's probably better for people to be able to choose at the end of the day. But then it seems a little contradictory. Like, how could this forgiving God be so wrathful as well? Well, I think the main contradictory idea that a lot of people get, why it seems so weird, is because of the gospel. Where in the New Testament, it's always forgiveness, 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 forgiveness. Where Jesus did so many miracles and forgave so many people. He forgave every single person of their sins from the very beginning to the end, right? So it's a little strange to bring up wrath and punishment in the face of such forgiveness. But you have to understand what forgiveness means in the first place. Forgiveness happens because the other party did something wrong and there's something that needs to be forgiven of. And for us, that's just us being really stupid and sinning at the end of the day. So there you have it. Jesus came down and forgave and took on God's judgment for us because it was still very much real. He averted all of God's wrath away from us onto himself so that we could live and we would no longer be constant fear of what God might do to us. Because that shows a lot about God's character. He could, and he very much might, just end all of us. He has before with the flood. But we've seen as he acts now that that's not the type of relationship that he desires. He wants us to follow him out of love, not out of fear, right? Knowing that he could do such things, but he doesn't, amplifies the love that we know he has for us. And so through that, we know that God's always going to be there for us. God's going to continue to forgive us, and God's going to continue to love us regardless of what we do. And God's simply just going to be there as a judge and as a father first and foremost to those that follow Christ. Because through the blood of Christ, we're given inheritance. We're given the opportunity to be adopted into the family of God. And what I'm saying may sound kind of hard to understand, and I get it, right? But the more you understand about God and Jesus, the less it starts to make sense. Because the more you know about God, the more you understand his completely ununderstandable nature. So the closer you get to him, it's actually very paradoxical. The less you know about them and the less you actually understand about them. So it's strange. It really is strange, the kind of person that God is. But we don't have to understand everything. God does all of that for us. If we did know everything, we'd have a lot harder of a job living each and every day as we do. Ignorance is bliss, as they say. And as ignorant as we are, we get to live life knowing that God handles a lot of things for us. And I think there's a lot of grace in that, a lot of mercy that God's shown us in those things. So it doesn't matter. Remember that God's wrath is very much there, but don't take it as complete fear of him, but take it as a way to love him even more, knowing that he could, but he doesn't. Instead, he chose to love. He chose to forgive. He chose to give us an opportunity. So forget fearing about God, but rather completely and utterly love him in all that you do. Because a love of God is the same thing as fearing God. You love him enough to respect him, and that at times can seem like fear, but at the end of the day, he's your father. He's your heavenly father. A father better than anyone can have on earth. So look to God. Look to Christ.